Let me just remember how to turn off the waiting room here. Okay. Great. Hello and welcome in, everyone. This is the National Policy Call from the Building Decarbonization Coalition, and I'm very excited that we'll be talking about Washington today. So we'll give everyone a minute or two to join, but feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, where you're calling in from, who you are, favorite fall activity if you're so inclined, and we'll get rolling pretty soon here. Right. For folks just joining, we'll get started in just a minute here with our Washington Policy Call. Thanks for being here. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Especially always interested where people are based. I think these calls always attract a lot of people outside of the state that we're talking about. So it's nice to see the national representation.
Yeah, it would be good to just at least see your climate zone.
Yes, yeah, if you want to get more technical for all the nerds here. I feel like I always remember what my climate zone is from when I'm looking at what plants I can plant here in Sacramento. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started with introductions. We have a very full call today, so I want to make sure we have time for Q&A at the end. But this is the Building Decarbonization Coalition, BDC, National Policy Call series, and today we're focusing on Washington. This is a series that we started this year. In the past, we've had policy calls for California and New York, which is where we have teams based. But as we're expanding our national purview, we've been trying to share the lessons between all the other states in between the coasts. And so far this year, we've had policy calls about Maine, Massachusetts, Illinois, and Colorado. And today, this will be our last call for the calendar year, and then we'll pick back up next year. So if you have any suggestions or places you want us to go next year, do let me know, and we will consider that in our planning. So a little bit about BDC. So the Building Decarbonization Coalition, emphasis on the coalition, is all about bringing folks together to inspire consumers, transform the market, and pass policies that help us decarbonize our built environment, make our air healthier, our homes more habitable for all. And so we are, as I said, national in scope, and we are working in a lot of different areas across the building decarb space. I like to think of ourselves as sort of like relational infrastructure. Like we want people to share ideas and resources and time. So if you ever need something and you're like, oh, I wonder if this thing exists, contact me and like I could probably find it for you and share it with you. So together we're all about accelerating the movement writ large. So logistics for today. Everyone should be muted. If they're not, please just mute yourself unless you're speaking. We will collect questions throughout the webinar in the chat, and then I will reflect those back to our panelists at the end. We have 3 presentations today, each around 10 minutes. So we should have a good 20 minutes or so for discussion later. And this recording will be placed with our other national policy calls in our resource library after the fact. So I'll just introduce our panelists. We will get into their wonderful presentations, and then we'll have discussion. So first we have Laura Feinstein, who's a fellow at the Sightline Institute, a wonderful group that I'm always excited to see like what blog they're going to release. I feel like their blogs come on Saturdays a lot, and I'm always like, ooh, I get my weekend reading some wonderful thought piece. So Laura will more about her wonderful institute, and then we have Duane, who I think of Duane Jonlin as like the code guy when I think of Washington. He's at the city of Seattle, and Steve Gelb, who's the director in the area for Emerald Cities Collaborative, which is a really wonderful organization that's centering communities in this clean energy transition. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and start with Laura. So take it away, Laura.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to talk today. So yes, as Kristen said, I'm with Sightline Institute, and we're a policy think tank focused on Cascadia, which includes Washington and other states in the Northwest. So my area has been really focusing on natural gas decarbonization. And so I wanted to give you guys a little bit of overview on what the policy is, but related to that. But first, we'll jump into a little bit of an overview on Washington, just for those of you who aren't intimately familiar with our state. We are just shy of 8 million people in the state, and we have about 2.9 million households. And 45% of those households use gas in their homes. I've provided some charts down here at the bottom just to give you a sense of where the natural gas is being used within the state and where the emissions accrue. So you can see a little over a quarter of the emissions in our state related to energy are from natural gas. We have 6 gas utilities in the state, the biggest of which is Puget Sound Energy, that serves sort of the metropolitan Seattle, Tacoma area. And then the next largest is less than half that size, Avista, which serves the east part of the state, in the Spokane area. Cascade Natural Gas has a little bit of a patchwork of territory. And Northwest Natural, which just has a tiny little corner down by Portland in Washington State, in Clark County. And then we have 2 city municipalities. Gas utilities are very small. So just an overview of Washington. Next slide, please. So we do have a state statute that is driving emission reductions down to basically net zero by 2050. That 95% below 1990 levels gets us to net zero when you count the absorption by the forest of the remaining carbon. So we have a pretty, big job to do by 2050 in the next less than 30 years. So recently our state put out an energy strategy. And in that, if you deep dive into the building section, you can see their strategy related to the direct consumption of fossil fuels, specifically natural gas, is to replace those appliances with high efficiency electric heat pumps for space and water heating. And so when you look at what the gas companies are selling gas and where their revenues come from and, their customer bases, et cetera, the vast majority of their income is coming from this direct consumption of fossil fuels, primarily for heating and water heating. So this is really going to gut their core business if the strategy is executed upon, which we hope it is. So we've been looking at strategies for, sort of dealing with that paradigm. So let's talk about that in the next slide. So in addition to that larger strategy, the larger overarching strategy, we've got a bunch of policy that has come into the state over the last maybe 5 years or so. And I just want to give you a quick overview of what's already on the books, and then we'll talk about where we are wanting to head. So we have a Climate Commitment Act, which is a cap and invest program in the state that was just passed, I think 2 years ago. And it's putting a price on carbon, and the natural gas utilities are covered by that, as are many other industries. And it's raising a lot more money than initially projected. The price of carbon has increased beyond what the initial analysis would have indicated. So that's off and running. We have a Clean Energy Transformation Act, which is mostly dealing with electric utilities and transforming their electric power into clean energy. So that'll remove a lot of the natural gas combustion for electric power. We have a Clean Buildings Act, which it has a lot of provisions in it, but just to highlight a couple, it's got a performance standard for large buildings. So buildings have to meet a certain benchmark for the amount of energy use, for the amount of energy that they use. And if they don't meet that, then they need to adjust their energy use, probably by retrofitting their buildings. And I believe there's some compliance fines in there as well. And then Duane's going to talk about this in a lot more detail, but we've recently passed some new building codes in the state that severely restrict the amount of gas that can be used to heat buildings and water heat. So those 4 policies are very foundational to getting our state off of natural gas, but none of them deal that significantly with the existing building stock, of which that's where the majority of the gas is being used. So so we need to start looking at how we get heat pumps out into homes and into commercial buildings, so that we can start to turn the ship. We know that we've got at the national level, this is a little chart that I pulled from a national study, but that heat pumps sales are surging, and they are overtaking gas furnaces, and we're just going to see that line increase, that green line increase, as the IRA incentives are adopted by more and more. And then we've got some state and local programs that incentivize, they're sort of similar, incentives for adopting high efficiency electric equipment. But we still have a ways to go even in that area, because we do have gas incentives still, and we have some fuel switching, some hesitancy among some utilities to encourage fuel switching. And then we got this other third pillar, which is a little bit different, where we've got all these gas utilities doing pipeline replacement programs for leak-prone pipe, and they've got plans to do tons of investment in this. So this is going to drive up rates. It's going to increase the risk of stranded assets for the state. So for the ratepayers in the state. So we've got this sort of threat coming on that angle too, for consumers who will ultimately, who are likely to bear much of the cost of this, although that's not necessarily a foregone conclusion. So, so that's kind of the lay of the land for the gas utility. And Sightline has been collaborating with a lot of other organizations in the state to come up with some strategies for figuring, out how to deal with all these policies and work with the utilities and whatnot. So next slide. So we've been looking at gas transition pathways. Last year, we had an introductory bill, HB 1589, which was all around gas utility decarbonization planning. And the bill didn't pass, but it made it into the Senate. It passed the House, made it in the Senate, and it's going to come back for another try. But it would have stopped expanding the gas system for one utility, the largest one that I highlighted, Puget Sound Energy, and forced them to start planning for decarbonizing their gas system, advancing electrification throughout their gas customer base, and a host of other provisions in it that were very exciting to those of us in the gas decarbonization space. We have a new bill that doesn't have a number yet that's going to incentivize geothermal network pilots, much like what is being done in New York and Massachusetts. And then we had a bill that also, it didn't make it very far. And if you took a look at it, it would probably strike you as a renewable natural gas bill, which it was. But it also had some provisions for new business models that gas utilities could adopt, like selling rooftop solar, getting into ground source heat pumps, for example. But those were really exciting new avenues for gas utilities who are right now only authorized legally to sell gas and gas services. So those are some of the ideas in Washington state that have caught on, and some of the ideas that we're hoping to get into policy and finding a vehicle, maybe through that first bill I mentioned. But we want to make sure that we're stopping the expansion of the polluting gas system. We don't want to waste money on replacing old pipes when we could repair them or decommission them altogether. We would like to see whole neighborhoods electrify at once so that we can decommission the gas system in that area and therefore take it off of the books and not require, so it's not something that's in the rate base that ratepayers will continue to need to pay for. We want to make sure that we protect ratepayers from imprudent spending on those soon to be stranded assets. So I think we need to look at approaches to putting more of that risk on utility shareholders instead of ratepayers. And we have some ideas around that. And then finally, getting the gas utilities on board with these climate-friendly businesses instead of, I think many of you are seeing this in your own states, where the gas utilities are really fighting against this transition and they're not pulling in the same direction as Team Climate. And we would like to see a way to get them on our side. And we think some of that might involve giving them new avenues to make money that benefit the climate, like they move us in the right direction. So we need lots of adoption of heat pumps. We need lots of adoption of other clean technologies, and maybe gas utilities can play a role in that makes them successful businesses into the future. So with that, I will pass that on to Duane.
Thank you so much, Laura. Powerful ideas indeed. And yes, excited for Duane to dive into what Laura mentioned about the code space, which is very exciting in Washington. So take it away, Duane.
Thanks. And what happened? There we go. I'll try to plow through 2 years of work in a 10-minute talk here, but let's bump to the next slide. So Washington State has a particular advantage in that we have legislation on the books that says we have to keep reducing our new building energy use down 70% from where it was in 2008 down to where it'll be in 2030. We are on track. And that middle one, 45% reduction by 2030, 2030 in terms of building construction is just around the corner. So that's a pretty heavy lift there. And then Seattle has its own legislation. Next. So in Seattle, we're looking at shrinking that pink triangle down to nothing over the next couple of decades. We can grow our clean electricity, which is already huge with our hydro, maybe a lot, but most of that has to be done with efficiency. Next. So my thought about burning fuel indoors is that it made sense several hundred years ago. couple hundred years ago, people got the idea of burning coal instead of dragging in wood. That made things more convenient for large buildings. 100 years ago, we got oil in buildings, which was way less messy than coal. And 50 years ago, gas. But really, those are all really far gone. And it is time to move beyond burning fuel. Next. So we're going for the two big slices of the decarbonization pie first. So no more fossil fuel or electric resistant space heating or water heating. The idea is that we leave the little uses, cooking and fireplaces mainly, which are more emotional and have big coalitions defending them, for later as technology improves. And if you look at that gas heater at the on the right, if you see on the right side of it, there's a little diagonal line. That's the electric cord. It's a very convincing LED fake gas fireplace, which itself is a fake wood burning fireplace. So that technology is coming along nicely and should be able to deal with that other 10%. Next. I would even make the case that heat pumps are a renewable energy source, because every day, even when it's cold, even when it's cloudy, the sun is warming up the air. The heat pump works to separate out that heat and take heat out of that cold air and put it in the building and keep your cat comfy inside. Next. So we have in our code no fossil fuel or electric resistance heating. That's the Seattle code. For the state version of it, in Eastern Washington, where it gets colder, we let them use primarily heat pumps with some fossil fuel to supplement on very cold days if they need it. Next. Same thing with water heating. You've got to do that by heat pump, and with both of these systems, there are a number of small exceptions, but they play out nicely. Next. So the gas industry, obviously, that they're concerned about this being an existential threat. Developers just are going to oppose anything that increases first cost, especially since they don't get anything back from this. The developers and even institutional owners are thinking those terms, that they're trying to reduce the first cost, whereas a higher performing building is a generally more expensive building. And manufacturers keep pushing back. They want to not be precluded from selling the systems they have already. But each of these arguments comes up over and over again. You can prepare for those code hearings easily in advance, knowing that they will always say these same things. Next. For our energy modeling pathway in the code, in Washington State, it's been emissions based for a while, and it sets up a comparison to a 2004 national standard. And in this case, I've circled office. At the state code level, you'd be allowed 45% as much carbon emissions as would have happened from that under that 2004 code. And in Seattle, since we're cooler than that, we make it 10% better. Next. We also require a substantial amount of rooftop solar at this point. You can see on the right that once you get to an 18-story building, you would have essentially covered the entire roof with solar panels. And so we have some workarounds for buildings that want to use their roof for different uses or don't have enough roof spacing. One of which is that we've exempted affordable housing projects from this requirement, and we've put in an option that people who don't want to put the solar on their own roof can gift it to an affordable housing project instead, and that's been getting some traffic already. Next. So with the recent Berkeley decision, there's this concern that we need to have a viable pathway that permits fossil fuel equipment. and that is based on energy use to keep it equivalent to our current one. So that top blue line is how much energy use we would require with heat pumps for a whole building. The second line is how much energy would be required if we were to use gas instead, because the gas and electric resistance are dramatically less efficient than the heat pump heating and water heating. So that little one on the bottom is how much additional energy use we would require people to make up with using our additional efficiency credit system, which is something that now most national codes have, but not California. Next, please. So it turns out that you need a lot of credits to make this go. If you look at that red circle, which is R2, you need another 236 credits. The current system we have requires, I think for an R2, requires like 41 credits. So a dramatic expansion of that, but that would mean that you'd have to do a whole bunch of things that are better than the code requires to be able to use the fossil fuel and have the same performance. We have a formula I won't get into here, but if anybody wants to geek out on that sometime, I can do that. Next. And let's go past this one, just as we're doing that. In Seattle, we have rules to start as you're replacing your existing water heating and space heating. You do it by heat pump. You can see on the left, there are a number of building types that are exempt right now, although they have to do this future decarbonization plan. Others have other pathways they can take that allow them to not have to replace things right now, but that future decarbonization plan requires them to have a fully engineered schematic design with cost estimate for what it's going to take to get to that final decarbonization. Next. So last slide, our City Light municipal utility did contract with EPRI to do an extensive study to see if our current system would be able to handle completely decarbonized Seattle with all the vehicles and all the buildings running completely on electricity. And the answer is yes, we can do it. We will need to do some other strategies internally to make things work, but even given projected increases in population, we should be able to handle that very well. And that's it. Did I
Yeah,
survive?
you did. That was amazing. Time to spare. Thank you for that amazing tour. I definitely want to know more about the Duane versus Johnny options in the code. I hope that's actually written in.
Those are actually how they're referred to, yeah.
So last but not least, we have Steve, and we'll get rolling. Here we are. Take it away, Steve.
Thanks, everyone, and happy to be here. So I'm Steve Gelb, Northwest Regional Director at Emerald Cities. I'm gonna talk about how do we ensure, oh, there's my typo, an equitable transition in Washington. So next slide, please. So Emerald Cities, for those of you who don't know, we promote high road regional economies, a clean economy versus our old dirty economies, but we want to be sure that we focus on those who have been historically left out to build an economy that deals with past inequities of income, wealth, and social inequities. So that's what we're looking at. Next slide, please. So the big number I keep in my head is a minimum number of the benefits from this transition to clean energy that should go to BIPOC and low-income communities. And this is spelled out both in the Justice 40 initiative from the Biden administration, but also in an effort in Washington called the Healthy Environment for All, or HEAL Act. And most state agencies, including our Department of Commerce, which runs our energy programs, is responsible for complying with the HEAL Act. And to really reverse injustices, we like to say we want justice 100, but we'll settle for a minimum of 40%. Next slide, please. So this, I'm going to just talk through a lot of things that are on the table in Washington right now around the building electrification and energy space. And what we're really thinking a lot about is connecting programs in a synergistic way. So it's both easier to navigate and we have a better chance of success. So conceivably, they'll all run around and concentrate on an energy navigator program, which we like to say is really bringing the information, the knowledge, and the support needed for all residents of Washington to benefit from a clean energy transition. It is specifically not a website, or not only a website, but it is a program to reach all residents. And some of the pieces of that are at the top, you see the community energy ambassadors. We're exploring ideas of partnering with community-based organizations and others that understand diverse cultures and language and can reach BIPOC communities with the information and the support needed to transition. We understand it is not just explaining incentive programs, but it is actually hand-holding and getting folks through a process. So we see that as part of this navigator. I'm going to go to the left. In contractors are part of most of these programs. The switch is on in California, Mass Saves, Massachusetts, and others. So we know there will need to be a referral program. A couple of things we're looking at with respect to that is an idea of heat pump certification. Currently, there's no licensing and no certification for any HVAC work in Washington, whereas there is for electrical and plumbing work. So we believe that, or exploring and think that certification would help consumers and assure a higher level of quality, protect the environment and the handling of refrigerants and from heat pumps, but also provide a level playing field for everyone, regardless of race, gender, and so on, to get employed in the field. Certifications help level the field. So and give us an opportunity to provide statewide recognized training to BIPOC community members and other low-income members and women, et cetera, who are currently severely underrepresented in the clean energy workforce. It also gives us an opportunity to focus on minority business owners and to support them to become qualified for referrals in this energy transition and help them build their businesses, which is critical to both build community wealth and also those businesses employ BIPOC and diverse workforce at a much, much higher rate than white or male-owned businesses traditionally. And then the final piece, and currently that we're really focused on, is weatherization. And the weather in Washington, our program is called Weatherization Plus Health. And it has evolved to become, and we're trying to support it to become, the main driver for supporting low-income residents in the transition to clean energy. In many states, the weatherization program is primarily federally funded. And in Washington, that has shifted. So we now have funding from Bonneville Power Administration. We have funding from our utilities. And the largest funder currently is the state of Washington through our state energy office. And that funding is coming in through something Laura mentioned earlier, which is our Climate Commitment Act. So, and with these other sources of funding, the program can be much more flexible in supporting undocumented residents, for example, in providing repairs necessary before energy projects, and in looking at electrification as opposed to just energy efficiency, which the weatherization program was based on. And what we're working on now is to provide a consistent path of funding for the weatherization program. Weatherization programs have been susceptible to the political winds and get huge increases of funding when we have a crisis and a progressive administration, and then get cut when things settle down or the administration changes, which makes it very, very difficult for agencies that administer weatherization to plan and have consistent staff, and also makes it difficult and is a disincentive for contractors to invest and build their businesses in this area because they're concerned about future downturn. So we're working on that. There are also a number of barriers that make weatherization difficult, and one is because it's state and federal funding. In Washington, it's subject to prevailing wage laws and rules. In some single-family projects, you could have 3 or 4 or more different prevailing wages that one worker has to comply with in a single day. So if they're wrapping ducts around, around some pipes or ducts, then for insulation, they're paid a certain wage. If they're installing a window, it's a different wage. If they're insulating, it's another wage. So that just creates huge administrative barriers. And we're exploring whether we can have a prevailing wage for weatherization workers that simplifies the system and also supports and doesn't create challenges for the other crafts that have prevailing wage as well. So we're working on that. That's a very high priority for us. And finally, we're looking at a different way to bring folks to weatherization and really looking at it differently. In the past, it has been often referral program where if your furnace is out, working with a community action agency, or you can't pay your bill, you're referred to the weatherization program. And we're dealt with one at a time, as resources are available. So next slide, please. So one of the things we're piloting is a program that Emerald City is working on, being funded by the Department of Energy, Weatherization Assistance Innovation Grant. And it's a community-centered weatherization program. And you can see the chart on the bottom shows sort of a very rough idea of typical programs. If you had 80 eligible residents, 20 might be recruited or more appropriately referred to a WAP program for implementation, and typically 5 or fewer would get implemented for a variety of reasons. Some of those barriers I talked about, sometimes it doesn't meet investment criteria, sometimes the projects are too small, or repairs are needed, many other barriers to implementation. And we know if we're going to hit the state energy goals that Laura talked about earlier, we cannot have 5 out of 80 eligible homes weatherized and electrified. We need to do much better. So the approach we're taking is to really focus on outreach with a community-based partner to approach those 80 eligible residents and recruit and educate. So 60 of them express interest in the program, and then to remove many of the barriers to implementation. So be able to support home repairs, be able to do smaller projects, support projects with longer paybacks, and so on, so that we can implement, say, 40 of those 60 that were recruited, and in essence, to implement approximately 50% of all the eligible homes in an area. And that's sort of our minimum. We hope to do even better than that. But we think this sort of approach is going to be needed if we're to both achieve our energy goals and to equitably transition to clean energy through efficiency and electrification. So I think that wraps it up for me. Thank you very much. And I think, well, let me touch on this a little bit. I just want to reflect that from an equity standpoint, we also think about what's missing. So we're very concerned about sort of moderate income households. The state and federal government has programs to support low income. As soon as you make $1 over low income, often you're not eligible for programs, but your need is very, very similar. And I think some of the federal legislation allows for funding and incentives, but what we lack, I think, in Washington, and we're looking at, is programs to assist moderate income residents, because they also often lack time, expertise, connections, and all other things that hinder their ability. We also know we have a lot of work to do with renters and landlords of how to reach landlords, convince them that this is a good investment, and protect renters from increased rent from these from the retrofits we're talking about in electrification. We also need to do work in multifamily buildings, which are kind of more complicated, because instead of one renter and one landlord, now we have multiple renters and one landlord, and often bigger projects and more expense. And finally, we have a challenge in our rural parts of Washington state, where we don't have enough scale at this point really to support contractors. So many parts of the state, we have no weatherization contractors, and a shortage of HVAC contractors, electricians, plumbers, et cetera. So we're exploring what we can do about that as well. So now I am truly finished. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Steve, and a round of applause for all of our panelists. I love how you all highlighted, all the good work that's happened, and then also like what's next. There's always a what's next, but so yeah, maybe we can kick off our discussion with sort of a overarching question for each of you. Fill in the blank. 2024 will be a successful year if, other than totally decarbonizing everything equitably, what is, for your perspective, your field, your silo, so to speak, what are you really excited about or looking forward to working toward this next year? And whoever has that top of mind could kick us off.
I can start. So I'm really hoping that we are able to pass a Puget Sound Energy decarbonization, gas decarbonization bill that mostly preserves a lot of the original concepts in the bill. I mean, there's definitely some opponents to the bill that are trying to shave off pieces of it, but I think it'll be a successful year if we do that. And the other thing that we're really excited about at Sightline is getting some network geothermal pilots going in, the policy in place for 2024. So we're hopeful that our legislator who's planning to sponsor a bill on that will be successful in the state legislature moving forward with that.
Yeah,
let me just ask a question, Laura. By geothermal, you mean ground source heat pump system? Okay, thank you.
Networked, so the community shares the loops, the boreholes, the loops.
So on the equity side, I think 24 will be successful if we start putting the pieces together to radically scale up our weatherization efforts to address low-income residents. So I think that means removing some of the barriers I talked about, reforming our prevailing wage system a little bit to attract more contractors, and also demonstrating that community-based models can indeed reach many more residents. More residents are interested, and we can bring them to the programs and electrify and make their homes more efficient, safe, comfortable, etc.
I love how this is. We're all approaching this from such different angles. It's that, you know, we're all these blind people, like defining the elephant by what part of it we're touching at the moment. If you can believe it, already next year we have to start into the next version of the Washington State and Seattle codes. And so for me, since we have come so far, we should celebrate the fact that there's been some tremendous progress. I believe that we have to define what's the endpoint. What is what level of efficiency and other features defines the building that will be good enough for us to carry forward on into 2050 and beyond, so that then if we can just put that stake out in the sand at some point, then we can define the steps between where we are now and what that ultimate goal is.
Thank you all. I'll be checking in with you December 31st, 2024, just to see where you're at. No pressure. I want to go back to something, Laura and Steve, that you both mentioned. Laura, you were talking about, you know, building at the neighborhood scale or thinking more community scale. And Steve, you've mentioned the need to scale up work for rural contractors and also radically scaling up weatherization. And so I'm wondering if you could each talk a little bit more about, you know, Laura, what does that neighborhood scale work look like? And Steve, the same for you with your work.
Well, you know, one of the paradigms that we have out there is this gas network. The gas pipeline serves, you know, huge numbers of people, and we all pay for that through our gas rates. The way that gas utilities make money is they build infrastructure and they put that into gas rates, and it's spread across everybody who's using the fuel. And in order to decrease gas rates or to sort of levelize them at right size them for the number of people that are still using it, you can't have the same size gas pipeline system serving a fewer and fewer customers and then gas still being, you know, even remotely close to affordable in that situation. So what we would like to see is a coordinated effort where we identify parts of the gas system that can be turned off without necessarily affecting the hydrology concerns of the whole gas system, so that we can reduce the amount of obligation that ratepayers have to ratepayers are left with. So the idea would be you would identify communities or neighborhoods that are, you know, sort of at the end of a line or in a line that doesn't really have any throughput requirements, or and ideally also a pipeline system that has been mostly depreciated as well. And you start converting those houses and other buildings in that area to electricity. And then once that community is fully electrified, you can actually just turn off the valve that serves gas to that area, and then decommission and pull that asset out of the rate base, retire it. So, you know, that's kind of at a macro level how it would work. But there's a lot of devil in the details. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'll answer your question. I'll answer the rural part of the question because we've started to give this a lot of thought. The way weatherization has traditionally worked is there's a certain pool of money, usually never enough, and then it is in Washington is distributed on a formula basis, which is based on both population and heating need. But what happens is in fairly sparsely populated rural areas, the amount of money dedicated is often not enough to support a staff person at the agency to do the work, or an auditor in the region to do the work. You know, in some regions, you know, the numbers are tiny in some areas, you know, like 12 homes per year. And then you can't have a single weatherization contractor that can survive on 12 homes a year. So you bring a contractor from another region and they stay in hotels and you're spending program money putting people up. So and then the same thing with electricians and plumbers who have even less role in the weatherization. So what we're looking at is to try to figure out what is an optimal minimum size or step size for providing these services in a geographic area, and then fund it accordingly. So, to make certain that you can have an efficient use of staff at the agency, you have enough work for a weatherization contractor, there's enough electrical work for an electrician to invest and understand working with weatherization, and so on. And then propose to the state that instead of funding on this strict formula basis, that we bring more money to the table and we say, okay, the minimum for investment in a community should be $2.5 million or $5 million, whatever that number is, in order to efficiently deliver and to be able to deliver at some scale, and then to scale up accordingly. So that's how we're looking at this sort of regional or not quite neighborhood, but at least a community or a county type of focus.
Steve, could I ask you, in most rural areas are not served by the national natural gas network, right? And in fact, I believe it's 50% of the population of the state. So my question is, those people would be on propane. The economics are actually much more favorable if you're replacing propane tanks with heat pump, right? That actually has a reasonable payback.
Yes, usually, yeah. I mean, the biggest thing we see in rural areas is, a lot of it's just a need for weatherization itself. We're seeing really poor housing conditions, a lot of mobile homes that need work. But yeah, it should pay back faster. But sometimes the weatherization agencies, I'm going to try to dig into my technical side, but have trouble justifying a heat pump because it won't pay back in 10 years, in 15 years in the life of the product, when we're looking at pure electrification, especially if we're converting from electric heat. Often that's really hard. From electric baseboard to heat pump sometimes is a challenge for folks. So there are a lot of complications, but I think the biggest one we see now is just getting to scale and getting to the right investment in these rural communities to make it work.
Thanks for that. Laura, two follow-ups in the chat for you, following up on, reducing or ceasing imprudent spending, and then also the gas utility decarb planning bill. So in terms of, stopping reinvestment in what will become stranded assets, Sarah wants to know if you have, if there are specific policy proposals out there looking at, reducing that imprudent spending, and any publications maybe you could put in the chat if you have a second. And maybe that ties into what's next for this gas utility decarb planning bill, and are you anticipating it having more barriers this next session, fewer, kind of what's the future of that look like, if you know?
Sure. So on the first point, I think there are a few examples around the concept of retiring or fixing the pipeline instead of replacing it. You probably are already aware, most of the listeners are probably already aware, that gas utilities make money on infrastructure investments. They do not make money on operations and maintenance. That's just a pass through at cost to ratepayers. So they're motivated to dig up an old pipe and put a new one in because that's more revenue for them, more profit for them. But I think in Massachusetts, I'm not 100% sure whether this is passed, but there's actually proposed legislation at least where the Public Utilities Commission there is going to allow the utility to earn a rate of return on advanced repair techniques that cost quite a bit less than replacing antiquated gas infrastructure. So that's one strategy that's out there. We've also seen in Colorado that for certain size projects, the utilities must propose non-gas pipeline alternatives. And they have some rules around what those need to look like. So they passed a regulation in 2022 on that. And I think that there has been some work in New York and in California as well on gas planning. And California has actually run some pilots on decommissioning, a framework for decommissioning pipelines. And there's a couple, at least one pilot, maybe two, that are looking at that, and they're targeting like older leak prone pipe as as one of the criteria. So that's, there is some work that's going on, but it's not terribly mature yet. So this would be a little bit more on the cutting edge, and hopefully something that many states are eager to adopt soon. On the HB 1589 bill, the PSE bill, it was a little bit of a surprise that didn't go through a long stakeholder process last year. And so you can't do that again, where you can surprise legislators and have them vote on something that they maybe don't have a ton of in-depth knowledge on. Now they've had a year to think about it, and there's a lot of lobbyists and other stakeholders engaged. I think the biggest objection that we have heard from just in the entire community, I'm not talking about the environmental community explicitly, but the entire community is they don't want a ban on new gas extensions, new gas line extensions, which is what the bill would do. They'd like to strike that, and it is possible that with the building codes that Duane talked about, that point is it's sort of already codified. I mean, there's definitely some exemptions. He mentioned where they're not targeting, fireplaces and cooking, so you can still run a gas line for that, but it's, it's not as economical to do just those things. So anyway, the strong lobbyists, the lobby organizations that have a lot of clout in the legislature seem to be really fixated on that point of the no new gas line extensions. And that might be an area that can be compromised on. The other, like from a low income and consumer advocacy perspective, there's another provision that would merge the rate bases, and it's very simple and crude. It just merges the rate bases, or it would allow the utility to propose a merger of the rate bases, but it doesn't have any sort of like details, any distinction between customers who are only served gas and not electricity by that utility, or vice versa, only electricity and not gas. And there's a lot of concern about equity and whose responsibility it is. So I think that that coalition has raised some of those points and are very concerned about it, and may withdraw support if it isn't handled a different way. So yeah, I'd say that those are probably the loudest objections that I heard. And there's, I mean, you can find a person who would object to a lot of things. So
yeah, the US is notorious for being able to object. But yeah, thank you so much, all of you, for sharing the incredible work that you're doing. I'm inspired and feel much more knowledgeable now, and I hope others feel that way as well. So thank you all for your time. I'll be sending out an email with all these resources, and you can always find this information on our website as well. So thank you, and have a great day, everyone.
You too.
Thanks, everyone.